A powerful judge believed he was untouchable, above the law and beyond accountability. But when Pam Bondi stood up to expose his secrets, no one could have imagined what came next. Watch closely, because the moment she revealed the truth, he did something so shocking it stunned an entire courtroom and changed everything. The Florida Supreme Court had seen its fair share of high-profile cases, but today felt different. The air was heavier, the tension nearly suffocating as government officials, legal scholars, and reporters filled the chamber. Rows of wooden benches were packed with observers, some leaning forward with anticipation, others whispering among themselves. At the back of the room, cameras from major news outlets were already rolling. This wasn't just another hearing. This was a battle. And at the center of it stood Pam Bondi. She adjusted the cuffs of her navy blue blazer, eyes locked on the towering figure seated at the elevated bench, Judge Marcus Ellison, a man whose name carried fear and influence in equal measure. He had ruled from this very bench for nearly 3 decades. His decisions were rarely questioned, his authority never challenged. Until now. Bondi had built her case meticulously, not just against a ruling, but against the man himself. For years, Ellison had manipulated the justice system to protect powerful figures, dismissing cases that threatened corporations, silencing whistleblowers, and bearing lawsuits that could have unraveled corruption. Today, in full view of the press, the legal community, and the state government, she was going to tear his legacy apart. The bailiff stepped forward. "All rise." A hush fell over the courtroom as Judge Ellison entered. He strode to his seat, his black robe flowing behind him like a shadow. His face was unreadable, but Bondi could see it, the faintest flicker of irritation in his usually controlled expression. The moment he sat, he leaned forward, his voice cool, deliberate. "Let's proceed quickly, Ms. Bondi. I have a docket full of cases that actually matter." A few chuckles rippled through the room. A reporter smirked. Bondi didn't react. She simply stepped forward, placing her brief on the podium with precise care. "Your Honor, I appreciate your time," she said smoothly, "but I have a duty to present evidence of judicial misconduct that cannot be ignored." Ellison exhaled through his nose. A flicker of something, annoyance, crossed his face. Bondi met his eyes, unwavering. "Your rulings have shown a pattern of dismissing critical cases without due process. Cases involving whistleblowers, corporate fraud, and civil rights violations. And today, I intend to prove it." A hush fell over the courtroom. For the first time, Ellison didn't look quite so untouchable. Ellison leaned back slightly in his chair, folding his hands in front of him. "Ms. Bondi," he said, his voice measured but laced with quiet condescension, "I will remind you, this courtroom does not entertain political theatrics. If you have something of substance, I suggest you get to it." Bondi didn't hesitate. She flipped to the first page of her brief and laid it on the table in front of her. "Let's talk about case number 21-340, she said, voice crisp. A state employee filed a whistleblower suit providing evidence of financial kickbacks within a government agency. It was dismissed under your ruling before any evidence could even be presented." Ellison barely glanced at the document. "The case lacked merit," he said flatly. Bondi tilted her head slightly. "Your Honor, the plaintiff had direct evidence. Emails, financial transactions. But you dismissed it outright." Ellison sighed, rubbing his temple. "Ms. Bondi, I will not allow you to waste this court's time." "Are you dismissing my argument?" Bondi interrupted. "Without reviewing the evidence?" The room stilled. A murmur spread through the observers. Ellison's fingers tightened around his gavel. The court reporter hesitated, unsure whether to keep typing. This was not how things were supposed to go in Judge Ellison's courtroom. He narrowed his eyes. "This is my courtroom, Ms. Bondi." Bondi's lips curled into the slightest smile. "No, Your Honor. This is the people's courtroom, and they deserve to know why you keep burying cases that threaten powerful individuals." The tension was electric. Ellison sat motionless for a moment, his knuckles whitening against the armrest. For the first time, he wasn't in control. Bondi pressed forward. "Let's move to case number 19-877, where a contractor exposed illegal financial dealings. You dismissed it in under 5 minutes." Ellison's face remained unreadable, but his jaw tightened. "These cases were dismissed because they lacked sufficient evidence," he replied coolly. Bondi raised an eyebrow. Then explain case number 20-112, where a journalist uncovered proof of illegal surveillance by a government agency. She was silenced after her lawsuit was thrown out of this very courtroom. A few heads turned. Someone in the back shifted uncomfortably. Ellison exhaled through his nose. Ms. Bondi, you are dangerously close to contempt. Bondi didn't budge. Are you threatening me, Your Honor? She asked, tilting her head, because that sounds an awful lot like intimidation. A sharp intake of breath from the jury box. Ellison's cheeks reddened. You are out of line, he snapped. Bondi leaned forward slightly. No, Your Honor. I'm finally bringing order to a system you've been manipulating for years. The courtroom felt different now. Bondi could see it in the eyes of the legal observers, the journalists, even the jury pool. The doubt was creeping in. Ellison had always projected dominance, but today, for the first time, he looked cornered. She turned the final page of her brief. And then we have case number 22-501, she said, pausing deliberately. Ellison's fingers stopped drumming. His entire body tensed. This case never reached public record because you sealed it under your order. The plaintiff, a federal investigator, had evidence of judicial misconduct. Your misconduct. The air in the room turned heavy. The stenographer stopped typing. Even Ellison's clerks froze. You are playing a dangerous game, Ms. Bondi, Ellison said, his voice lower now, almost a growl. Bondi's heart pounded, but her voice remained steady. No, Your Honor, I'm holding you accountable. The courtroom had turned utterly silent. Each breath, each rustle of clothing amplified in the electrified tension. Everyone watched as Judge Ellison, the once unshakable authority figure, now visibly struggled to maintain control. Bondi seized the moment, stepping forward again. Her voice was firm, yet calm, filled with a sense of justice rather than personal vendetta. Your Honor, this isn't about you and me, she said slowly, addressing the entire courtroom as much as Ellison. This is about accountability. This is about transparency. How many more cases, how many more lives will be affected because justice was denied in this very room? She paused, her gaze steady. Ellison stared at her, his fingers clenching and unclenching around the edges of his bench. Enough, Ellison snapped, his voice harsh but now carrying an unmistakable undertone of desperation. This court is adjourned. He reached hastily for his gavel, ready to end it. But before he could slam it down, Bondi spoke again, calmly, quietly, but powerfully enough to stop him in his tracks. You can silence this hearing, Your Honor, but you cannot silence the truth. Ellison froze mid-motion, his arms suspended awkwardly in the air. Cameras clicked from the back. Someone gasped audibly in the gallery. The stenographer's fingers hovered uncertainly above her keys. The judge's hand trembled slightly, betraying his internal conflict. Bondi's words hung heavy in the air. She had stripped him of his veneer, revealed him not as a figure of impartial justice, but as a man desperately holding on to his slipping authority. You have a choice right now, Bondi continued, her voice cutting clearly through the stunned courtroom. End this hearing, or face the truth. Either way, your actions today speak louder than any ruling you've ever made. Ellison's chest rose and fell visibly, his breathing uneven. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came out. Finally, humiliation and fury flashed across his face. He slammed the gavel down violently. Court dismissed, he barked, nearly shouting, his voice strained with emotion. Without another glance, he rose abruptly from his chair and stormed from the courtroom, his robes billowing behind him. The door slammed shut with a reverberating echo. For a long moment, no one moved. Every eye was wide, every mouth slightly open in disbelief. The room was frozen. Then, like a breaking wave, chaos erupted. Reporters rushed toward the exits, desperate to file their reports. Observers whispered and shouted in disbelief at what they'd witnessed. Clerks exchanged worried glances, not sure how to proceed. Bondi stood quietly at the podium, her shoulders squared, her expression unreadable. She had won, but the fight wasn't over. It was only just beginning. By evening, Bondi's confrontation with Ellison dominated the news cycle. Headlines flashed across television screens nationwide. Judge flees courtroom after Pam Bondi's stunning confrontation. Judicial misconduct investigation launched after explosive hearing. Bondi exposes courtroom corruption. What's next for Judge Ellison? Her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Colleagues, reporters, even acquaintances from years past, all seeking a comment, a quote, insight into the moment she'd stood firm against power. Bondi sat at her desk, skimming the news on her tablet, her mind still replaying Ellison's stunned face. She knew the consequences of today would stretch far beyond the courtroom. She glanced up as her assistant, Lauren, knocked lightly on her door before stepping in, a cautious look in her eyes. "Pam, you should see this," Lauren said, handing over her phone. Bondi took it, scanning the screen. Her pulse quickened slightly as she read the carefully worded statement from the Florida Judicial Ethics Board. "Due to the seriousness of the allegations raised today, we will conduct a thorough and impartial review of Judge Marcus Ellison's judicial conduct." Bondi set the phone down, exhaling slowly. She knew this wasn't the end. Ellison had powerful allies and retaliation would be swift. As if on cue, her office phone buzzed insistently. Lauren glanced at it, eyebrows knitting together. "It's an unknown number," she said, hesitant. Bondi nodded calmly. "I'll take it." She picked up, holding the receiver to her ear. "Pam Bondi speaking." A low, gravelly voice responded immediately, sharp and threatening. "You just made a lot of powerful enemies today. Are you sure you're ready for what's coming?" Bondi paused for just a heartbeat, then smiled slightly. "I'm always ready." She hung up, meeting Lauren's worried gaze without wavering. "Are you all right?" Lauren asked carefully. Bondi stood, adjusting her blazer slightly. "Better than ever," she replied. "Let them come. Because today we showed everyone something crucial." Lauren tilted her head, curious. "And what's that?" Bondi smiled, a spark of determination lighting her eyes. "That justice isn't determined by who holds the gavel, Lauren. It's determined by who has the courage to challenge it." The next few days passed in a whirlwind of media interviews, investigative hearings, and heated public debates. Bondi remained at the center, calmly facing the scrutiny and threats as they came. Ellison disappeared from public view, refusing all requests for comment. But behind the scenes, she knew he was fighting to save his career, mobilizing every connection he had to discredit her. Yet something had shifted irreversibly. The public had seen the confrontation. They'd witnessed a judge fleeing accountability in real time. No amount of behind-the-scenes maneuvering could erase that from the public's mind. One evening, a week after the courtroom standoff, Bondi sat quietly in her office. The news flickered on the television, another panel dissecting the implications of the ongoing judicial inquiry. Her phone vibrated again. She glanced at it, recognizing another unknown number. She picked up calmly. "Bondi." There was silence, then a familiar voice, this time quieter, more measured. "Ms. Bondi, it's Marcus Ellison." She paused, surprised but composed. "Judge Ellison," she acknowledged neutrally. "What can I do for you?" He cleared his throat, voice tired. "I want you to understand something. What happened in that courtroom, it destroyed my reputation. It's ruined my legacy." Bondi listened quietly, sensing the heavy weight behind his words. "But," he continued bitterly, "I realize now you were right about something." She waited silently. "Power, unchecked power. It's dangerous. Even I couldn't see how far I'd gone." Bondi considered his words, then spoke softly, sincerely. "Then help make it right. Accept responsibility. Speak the truth. You can still influence how history remembers you." He chuckled humorlessly. "It's too late for that." "It's never too late," she countered gently. "Justice isn't about perfection. It's about honesty, accountability." Another long silence stretched between them. "I'll consider it," he finally murmured. "But whatever happens next, remember one thing, Ms. Bondi. This isn't over. You've set something bigger in motion." She nodded slowly, despite knowing he couldn't see her. "I'm counting on it." Ellison hung up, leaving Bondi holding the phone, thoughtful. He was right. This wasn't over. It had only just begun. Bondi leaned back, staring out the window at the city lights shimmering against the darkness. She was ready. Justice isn't about who holds the gavel. It's about who has the courage to challenge it.